is DiPietro and Rothenberg.
Rich Cimini.
I do not think Rodgers will be back. I just think Woody Johnson really doesn't want him back. And if Woody is smart, he will defer that decision to his two new hires. If the owner's not on board, it's going to be tough to bring him back. And I think there's a host of salary cap reasons also not to bring him back. So if I had to bet right now, I would say he's not back. I wouldn't say it's out of the question. I probably would just say it's like a 10 or 20% chance.
This is DiPietro and Rothenberg on 880 ESPN and the ESPN New York app.
Final hour of the week here on DNR. Jake Asman in for Dave and Rick for another hour, and then Monday through Thursday next week. Ray is here. Tom Bauer is here. And we got a lot to do this hour. Stuff you missed is coming up. We'll make some picks for the NFL slate. And we have the 3 stars to round out the show. But joining us right now is a good friend of mine. He played for the New York Jets. He played in the NFL for a decade, former NFL defensive lineman, and currently a CBS Sports NFL analyst. Leger Douzable joins us now. Leger, Happy New Year. Happy holidays, my man. Thanks for hopping on this morning.
Same to you, Jake. Thanks for having me on.
So you just heard it there coming back from the break. Rich Cimini saying he doesn't think Aaron Rodgers is going to be back with the Jets next year. What are your thoughts on Rodgers and his future with the Jets?
Yeah, I think you have to really break down all the different scenarios when it comes to Aaron Rodgers potentially coming back or not coming back, right? I think Rich alluded to a lot of them, right? The cap reasons, first of all. Now, I've heard Rodgers come out and say that he's willing to restructure. You also have to realize, depending on the GM and head coach, do they see Rodgers as part of the future plan, right? How does that mesh with the offense that potentially the new head coach, if he's an offensive-minded coach, or even if he's not, the offensive coordinator bringing in? So there's a lot to decipher over these next couple of weeks, and as the Jets go through the process of hiring a new coach. From my standpoint, Jake, I don't see Aaron Rodgers coming back. You have to think this is a guy who's been at the pinnacle of his game, who's won a Super Bowl, who went through a coaching change in Green Bay, right, where they, end up eventually drafting his replacement, kind of like him when he was there with Favre when he came in. And now you have a guy that's been here for 2 years and you're going to get a wholesale change again. I just don't foresee Aaron Rodgers going through that again, depending on who is hired. I stated this the other day. I think Tyrod Taylor would be a perfect bridge quarterback because where the Jets are currently slated in the draft, right now, as I'm doing my breakdown of all the college players, there's only 2 first-round quarterbacks, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, and I would surmise that both of those guys are either going 1, 2, or in the top 3, right? So the Jets are not going to be in a prime position to take their quarterback of the future. So they most likely will have to take one in the later rounds, and hopefully he can develop, behind Tyrod Taylor or even revisit it the year after. So I kind of agree with Rich in this scenario that I don't see Aaron Rodgers coming back.
Leger Douzable, former Jet, NFL veteran, now with CBS Sports with us here on DNR. Jake Asman in for the guys. I tend to agree. I think the only scenario where maybe it would make sense to bring Rodgers back is if he takes that pay cut, because then, Rodgers made the comment that both him and Devontae would have to take pay cuts to stay, and we know they want to play together. So, could you sell me on, hey, Rodgers taking a pay cut, so you're not really worried about the future dead cap concerns. You get Devontae back, and if you hire the right coach, maybe that guy will look at Rodgers as our best chance to win, and then we draft someone that sits behind him, and we figure out quarterback altogether in 2026 after next year.
I mean, the only pushback I would have on that, and I'm sure we're going to get to this subject eventually, Jake, is where does Garrett Wilson fit in all that? I mean, because his body language the last couple of weeks, him in press conferences, you can tell it's been a lot for him, right? Since Devontae's come over, it's been weird trying to find the mesh between Aaron Rodgers and himself and him and Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers. And when you look at the last 2 games, like Devontae Adams has clearly outpaced him 2-1, I believe, 13 to 6 targets and 13 to 7 targets and 12 to 6 targets has been the last 2 games. When you talk about the targets that Devontae Adams has received compared to Garrett Wilson. And, we all, including myself, because I was around the team during training camp, I literally thought Garrett Wilson was going for 1,500, the way he looked with Aaron Rodgers in training camp
Me
this
too.
year.
Yeah.
Now he has a chance to go over 1,000 this year. But it'd be interesting to see how that dynamic, if they both were to come back, Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams, like what does that dynamic mean for Garrett Wilson? Because Garrett Wilson needs to be essentially your Batman, right? You need to find a Robin that's close to his skill set, but also doesn't take away from his targets. Because I was actually just breaking down the film again from Sunday's game, and the way this kid is able to separate, there's opportunities on the field that's not being had now. I know Rodgers came out and said, sometimes the safety's over the top, but, some of these are hole shots that Aaron Rodgers has been synonymous with making in his past career. And then there's other times where it's just simple drag routes where Garrett Wilson is wide open. One that comes to mind, I know everybody talked about this one, was on the 4th down in the red zone. I literally just saw Enigma. Don't know if you got a chance to watch the Aaron Rodgers document, but he talked about percentages when it comes to route concepts and what percentage each route has in regards to making a completion, right? He talked about James Jones when, you throw a fade ball, it's like 30% completion or 20% completion percentage, but he said with James Jones, it's 50%. And then he talked about some of those simple routes where it was either a pivot route or a drag route, those being higher percentage throws, 80%. So I go back to that and I look at that and I'm like, Garrett Wilson's wide open on the drag route. That's like a 80% completion percentage in man coverage that he can run away from the corner and get a first down. You're throwing a fade at Devontae, it's like 30%. So it's just like, those are the scenarios. You can tell Garrett Wilson has just been frustrated the last couple of weeks.
So with that said, with Garrett, Leger, obviously, look, if you're deciding between Aaron or Garrett, I think every Jet fan would say, well, of course, you got to keep Garrett. But there's a lot of speculation. Oh, he could request a trade. But as a former player, like you look at Garrett's contract still on his rookie deal, 2 years left with the 5th-year option. Like the Jets could just say, hey, we're not trading you. So put yourself in Garrett Wilson's shoes. Like, if he requests a trade, okay, like, then what? Like, how do you see it ultimately playing out?
Yeah, I don't see him doing that because, like you said, they essentially have, even with the franchise tag, 3 more years of his service if they want to, right? That's the thing about being a rookie. Like, it's on a rookie deal, it's tough to kind of demand things. Now, we've seen guys do it in the past, but randomly or rarely does the rookie on a rookie contract or the player on a rookie contract have that much juice because of the way the contract is constructed. And that's why a lot of guys like to get guys in the first round because you have that 5th-year option. And then, worst come to worst, you have a franchise tag. We saw that play out with Saquon Barkley with the New York Giants, right? So, it's just, again, putting myself in his shoes, it's frustrating, right? Because again, you're excited to play with Aaron Rodgers. During training camp, everything looked promising. And then the first couple of weeks of the season, they just seemed like they weren't on the same page. Where in training camp, they just seemed like they were in total sync, right? So you don't know how that happens, in that short period of time. Maybe, the looks that defenses give you are different than what you were accustomed to in training camp. A lot of that could have something to do with it. And then also, they during the middle of the season, they were in sync again, and then you make the trade for Devontae, and now it's trying to find a balance between who gets the ball, who's truly the number one guy. Is this a progression thing where, depending on what the defense is showing me, this is where I'm going with the football? So you got to think for 3 straight years, Garrett Wilson has dealt with, a lot of frustration. You got to think this is a kid that didn't lose any games barely in high school and didn't barely lose any games in college. So he's coming to the Jets, and now he's had 3 straight losing seasons. Like that takes a toll on a guy that's used to winning year in and year out and competing at the highest level. So he doesn't have any real juice, right? He can demand a trade, but like you say, the Jets can say, well, we technically got you for 3 more years if we want you. Like there's nothing you can do about it. So, but again, you never want your players going into the year where they're disgruntled, right? Depending on the lack thereof of changes or the changes that a team makes.
Leger Douzable with us here on DNR. Jake Asman in for the guys. Leger, former Jet, played in the NFL for a decade. You can check him out on CBS Sports HQ, Sirius XM, when he calls games for ESPN as well. The Jets coaching search, I'm fascinated by it, Leger. And, you played for 2 different head coaches with the Jets. You played for Rex, of course. You played for Todd Bowles. And when you were with the Niners, Robert Saleh was your defensive coordinator. So you have experience with the last 3 coaches the Jets have had. From what you've seen from this Jets team and going forward, give me the type of coach you believe the Jets need if they're ever going to get back on track.
Yeah, first and foremost, you got to have a guy that comes in that's going to change the culture, right? Like the thing about that I loved about Rex is that he literally made everybody want to literally run through a brick wall, and I know that's a cliche, or go to war to wear that green and white. Like, it meant something, right? And I think that, Aaron Glenn makes a lot of sense because he's a former Jet, former Pro Bowl guy here. It would mean a lot to him to come back and literally resurrect the team that he played for, that he loved, that he has a lot of great memories with. So I think that makes a lot of sense. But first and foremost, you got to have somebody that's going to be able to come in and change the culture. And we've seen some of those clips of Aaron, Glenn talking where, Dan Campbell has him talk in front of the room, and you see every player in there engaged, right, locked in. That's the kind of guy you want, to come into the building and kind of redefine and reset this culture. And then also what he's been able to do with the Detroit's defense with all the injuries that they've occurred, right? So you got a guy that's able to adjust. That's another thing. So you love that as well. And then he's relatable, right? A guy that played at the highest level, he's going to be relatable to the players. The players are going to want to play for him. I think that's why it makes a lot of sense. So when you talk about, and I just want to single out, Aaron Glenn, I think Mike Vrabel makes a lot of sense as well. But the thing is, for this Jets team, like the offense has been the issue for the last couple of years. Now, it's kind of switched this season once Robert Saleh got fired and Ulbrich took on more responsibility. Then you saw the defense kind of tailor off, and they struggled. I thought the defense played well enough to win this past Sunday for sure. But you got to have somebody that's going to change the culture, Jake. Like, people have to realize in that building, and every time I put on that green and white, it meant something to me. Like, I never wanted to let my guys down. You watch this, Jake. Like, we had a deep defensive line, and, like, everybody can make plays on our defensive line. So, like, there really wasn't a drop-off, and we never wanted to let the guy next to us down, right? It meant something. It's like they got to have somebody that comes in that lets every player know what it means to wear that green and white and the pride you have to wear it.
Leger, you brought up Rex. He's been on this station. He joins actually this show every single Monday during the football season. He wants this job again. Your thoughts on Rex? Do you think Rex 2.0 with the Jets could actually work?
It'll be interesting, right? Rex has been out of coaching for a minute, right? Things have changed in the NFL. The game hasn't, quote unquote, changed, but the way these kids' mindsets have kind of changed. You talked about it, or you alluded to it earlier. Like, it was rare for guys to kind of like force their way and ask for a trade, but now that's more common than everything. I think the way that Rex coaches is still relatable, right? Just because he's a player's coach. You've heard that all the time, right? And he loves the Jets. You hear him talk about it all the time when he's on ESPN, whether it's Get Up, whether he's on this show on Monday that you talk about. He always, when he talks about the Jets, refers to it as we, right? That lets you know that he still cares about it. So I would love to see Rex get a real opportunity to interview, but at bare minimum, at worst, I would love him to be back on the defensive side as a D coordinator. Right, I think that could be the bare minimum. Again, whether a guy like Aaron Glenn gets a job or Vrabel or even an offensive-minded coach, I think Rex being back in the building would be amazing, even if it isn't at the head coaching job. I think he deserves a real legit shot in the interview process, but at bare minimum, I would love to see him back on the staff, like I said, as a defensive coordinator.
You know him better than most people. Would Rex's ego allow him to be a DC? Like, would he be comfortable being the DC of this franchise?
100%. I think he would be. I think he would be. Just knowing Rex, he loves ball. Now, he loves what he's doing right now, being on ESPN and being an analyst. But I think he would really love just to be around football. Like, there are certain guys that are just football coaches, Jake. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's one of those dudes. Once you get around him, like, he just loves ball and wants to talk ball, and one of the most creative minds when it comes to defensive schematics. Like, literally we'll have 5 or 6 guys in the line of scrimmage and literally only rush 2 and we'll get a free rusher at the quarterback. Like, he does it at such a high level on the defensive side. I think people talk about his quote unquote ego, or maybe not, but like, I don't think there's a scenario where he wouldn't be comfortable being the DC. Now, again, I think he would love to be the head coach, but I could see him being willing to be a defensive coordinator just to get back in the game, right? Because he loves the game of football.
Sign me up for that. Leger Douzable, former Jet, played in the NFL for a decade. You can check him out now on CBS Sports, Sirius XM, and calling games on ESPN. Leger, you're the man. Happy holidays, and I appreciate you getting up and joining us this morning.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
Leger Douzable with us there. And, look, I'd be surprised personally if Rex would actually be willing to be the Jets' defensive coordinator. I would be, but I'd love that. I mean, you tell me who the head coach is. You hire an offensive-minded coach, and Rex is your DC. You'd feel great about that. Now, the issue would potentially be the first sign of trouble. The fan base is going to be like, fire whoever the coach is, make Rex the guy. But if you hire a real coach and Rex was a part of the staff as the DC, I think that would definitely excite a lot of Jet fans.